Hello and welcome to Where There's Life. Now on Where There's Life, we quite often talk about the effect of illness on ill people. But tonight, we're going to talk about the effect of illness on the people they're married to. And to start off with, we're going to look at a story which we have followed over a period of 6 months. Last autumn, we went to film 23-year-old Ashley Lapper receiving treatment at the Royal Hallamshire Hospital in Sheffield. Ashley had once been a scaffolder, but was laid off. He lives with his wife and 2 young children on an estate in Sheffield.
I came into hospital about my knees, because I had bad knees. And one day he took a blood test, and they found out that my blood was so low. And then they took a bone marrow, and then they found out I'd got leukemia.
Part of the treatment for leukemia is chemotherapy. Powerful drugs are injected through plastic tubes into the bloodstream, which can make the patient sick for hours on end. Even though he's been through treatments many times himself, his sense of humour helps other patients bear up to the treatment. At first, his illness brought him and his wife Jane closer together.
We're more friendly. Not just being married, we are good friends as well as being married, whereas we didn't used to be that good friends before. We think a lot more about things together than we ever did, and do a lot of things together than what we ever used to do. You know, generally, we're just a lot happier for him having it, really. As though, you know, it's just at the back of his head that he's got it, and you just forget about it most of the time, you know, and just get on with life.
But 5 months later, with Ashley out of hospital and his treatment stopped, the strain had started to tell on him and Jane.
Since he came out of hospital, he's been up and down, different moods, going through phases, you know, terrible, driving me crackers. Not had any time for us at all until these last few weeks. He went through a phase of drinking a lot, going out every night. It was as if he just didn't care that he was married, and he just wanted to live it all up before he died. But which I can understand, but I'm not in that situation, so I'm at the other end, I'm getting all of it. I've got to put up with everything, and kids and one thing and another that's stopping in the house, and it just gets to a point where you just want to just get up and leave everything. And I just wanted to go and leave everything, but I can't because I've got my kids to think about, and I love him after all. He's my husband and I love him. And I mean, you go through bad patches, it's just that it's been worse since he's had leukemia. On one occasion, he come in and he said he'd been fighting, and that was just another excuse to say that he was coming in late because he'd been fighting. Then another time, he phoned me up round about 1:30 and said that he was going to kill himself because he was that fed up, and because he knew for a fact when he came in I was going to go mad. So it was just another of his excuses to change it so that when he did come home I'd feel sorry for him. It's like being that way all the time, he's used excuses. I just felt alone all the way through. But like at the beginning you think, oh, he's going to die, he's my love, you know, and everything. But then when all this comes with it, you don't expect it. But it's terrible things that you have to go through. I didn't have anyone to talk to. He didn't understand the pressures I had. Stopping in every day with kids, nowhere to go, anything. He just didn't understand at all. And that made me feel worse because it were all Ashley. Nobody bothered about me, you know. And that's really the main thing about it is nobody realises all the pressures that you've got to be under.
Jane's not showing as much attention towards me. She's turned back to kids. And I miss that sometimes. Well, I miss it a lot, actually. Because the illness I've got, I need a lot of help. It's hard, really, when you know that you're dying and you haven't got long to live. You need everybody. And people don't think, well, you're not going to die yet. You've got plenty of years to go. But they don't realise what I go through. With Jane, I've never showed my feelings and out like that. And I had to go to drink to get drunk, to show me feelings. I could let it all come out then when I was drunk. And I just wanted to be happy, and the only time I could be happy is if I was drinking. I know I'm dying, I know I ain't got long to live. It just depends what happens. And when you're like that, you like to get it all into one go, like, I've got to enjoy myself, I've got to do this. And I've got no time for Jane and kids. I want to go out and enjoy myself. But I think she'd understand that if she were in my situation. And I'd get a lot of setbacks on it, like, do a lot of arguing and things like that. But I don't listen to her. I just go out, have a drink with my friends and enjoy life, how short it is. I still love Jane, I love my kids. It'd hurt me if I died, and because they're so young, they'd probably not know me. That's what hurts me sometimes. I'm just torn between being married and having my kids and wanting to be free.
We were planning to have another child before we got told he got leukemia, but I didn't want one straight away. We just wanted 3, and we've got 2 girls. But now he wants one, and I mean, we're not sure that we can really yet. He's going to have a test, but he wants a little boy, obviously, to carry his name on, and what'll be his sort of thing. But I just don't think I could cope. It's just, I mean, I've got my hands full now, more than full, and I just cannot cope with what I've got. So I don't know how ever I'd cope with another one. And there again, if I did have another one and anything serious happened to Ashley before it should have, I'm just going to be left with a little baby to cope with and 2 young girls. And I just know I won't be able to cope at all.
I've always wanted a little lad, but I understand her point of view. What she says, if we have a little child and I do die, she's going to be burdened with all 3 kids to bring them up on her own. But like I said, life's not long enough for me to wait to have a little lad what I want. And we've got to talk about that, really.
We don't really discuss it, but Ashley don't want me to marry again because he's going to haunt me. You know, I don't wish happiness on me when he does go or anything like that, or happiness for my kids. He just don't want me, myself, to go with anyone else because he's had me, and he, you know, to himself, he don't want me to go with anyone else.
Well, from my point of view, I've married Jane for what she is. And to marry Jane, from my point of view, is she's going to be always with me. I don't want anybody coming in and then, because my kids are only young, they're not going to know me in 5 or 6 years' time, and I don't want them to be calling Dad to somebody else.
There's no way that you can ever let your kids forget who the real dad is, can you? No way whatsoever. They're their father. And I mean, I'm not saying I'd jump at first chance, you know. I mean, I've loved Ashley since I was 16, and I'm not going to stop just, you know, just like click of a finger. But I mean, I'm only young. It's got to be expected. But I mean, it's going to be terrible for kids. They'll not understand why the dad's gone away, which is going to be awful for me because they're going to like bring up Daddy. And I'm going to bust out crying, which I'm going to do in a minute. But that's going to be a bit worse for me. But I can't do without him.
That's what I want, really. That's why I married you.
I know.
Well, first of all, we'd like to reassure people that not everyone dies of leukemia, because they don't. But just going back to the film, while the men had a lot of problems to sort out, it seemed to me that the women were really worn down with trying to come to terms in their own minds about their husband's illness. And we have some people in the studio who are in a similar situation. I just want to see how they reacted. Elaine, what happened in your family when illness struck?
Well, my husband had his first heart attack after we'd been married 7 years, and there was a history in the family on my husband's side that none of the men reached the age of 50, all through heart disease. And the first heart attack, we managed to battle through. We had 3 young children, but we tended to work together. And then the second heart attack was much worse. And it became the strain of bringing up 3 children, the logistics of running to the hospital. How is he going to be? The strain that society puts on you, running the business, you can't imagine what it's like, and you feel like in the midst of all this, putting up your hand and saying, hey, what about me? Where do I fit in? Because you have to be all things to all people. And you never seem to please them. No matter what I did for Leonard, didn't seem to please him, like they said in the film.
What do you mean by that?
Because I remember one night, I had had enough, and I thought, I've got to get out. And I went to the pictures with a girlfriend, and I met a couple who were friends, in inverted commas. And they looked at me and said, what are you doing here? I said, I've come to see the film. But how could you, when your husband's so ill? There seems to be, they want you to weep and wail, but they don't want to listen. They don't want you to look put together. You have to be the martyr. I think very much the woman's role is, well, that's it. Yes, that's your role. And it's expected of you. Whereas if a man becomes a carer, he kind of becomes a hero. Or if men tend to say, okay, I can't cope, and they go off and the marriage breaks, that seems to be okay. But the woman's role is you have to stay there, no matter what, and no matter what it does to you, and it's very difficult.
What did you need at that time, then? What kind of support would you have wanted?
I needed laughter. I needed non-judgmental support, which is very important. But it's very hard to understand unless you've actually been there. I needed to be able to talk to my husband. In the film, they were saying that now they were talking. Well, this happened to us because there is a lot of resentment. Leonard resented me being well. I resented him being ill. But in my day and age, one didn't articulate these thoughts. Sometimes I used to be very angry at what fate had in store. Then I sort of rationalised and I have a wallow time, and then it's up you get. There was also the difficulty that I had to become the strong one, and as I became stronger, then there became a big gap between us. But I think it's very, very much, you have to speak about all the lurky things, and then they don't get out of hand.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can I just talk to Martin? Now, your wife has a serious and unpleasant disease called Huntington's chorea.
That's right.
What did her disease do to your marriage and your relationship?
That's a difficult one to answer in a nutshell, but I'll try. It was, first of all, as you realise, it's a very protracted illness, not like Elaine's, which is something you live with from day to day. In the case of HC, it occurred to me, of course, that she was gradually getting worse, but of course I didn't have with her the ability to be able to talk to her, to discuss what I'd done in the day, because her mind had started to go.
Right.
Her body had started to go. Therefore, 50% of me switched off. The other 50% of me switched on to other women. Unfortunately, the bit that switched off for my wife and switched on to other women, I then reversed that process, because the part of me that desired other women would say, Martin, hold it, you can't. You're married with 14 kids, or 4 in fact, but it felt like 14 at the time. Still does. But of course I was going through this terrible trauma, Miriam, because for about 5 or 6 years I didn't know where I stood. I knew that one day she would have to be professionally looked after and taken away from me, either by God or taken away to a secure place to be looked after. But there was no deadline with that. And of course then, it was not quite the same as being a woman, because women said to me, Martin, but you're a man, you can't look after a family. I mean, you've got to work. It can't be done. But I did it, with great difficulty.
Did you feel, as it was said in the film, did you feel neglected? Did you feel that nobody was there to help and support you to sort out your emotional
Oh, constantly. I mean, you see, the other aspect too is that, you see, you do feel like getting up and walking out. I felt like doing it dozens of times. Nothing is ever done properly because as a one-parent male family with a fifth child, which was my wife in that case, I was trying to do all things all the time. Nothing's done properly, and you just do at things. You have no social life. And it's when I went out seeing other couples who would invite me out on my own to socialize with them, and I would see a married couple with a wife rushing around doing things. That's when you miss companionship, because you would then see other couples what you are missing indoors. And then you go back to bleak gloom again.
What kind of help and support would you have liked?
Companionship, preferably from the opposite sex, and touching, because I'm quite tactile like that. And of course, someone just
sorry,
talk to.
can I just ask you about that? Do you mean that you needed a little TLC, tender love and care? Is that what you're missing?
Of course, most certainly. And of course, I think as well, you tend not to get a great deal of support from family. You get it in words. You don't get it from a practical point of view. Friends, okay, yes, well, friends are understanding to a degree, but they tend not to want to socialize with you because the woman you married is not the woman they then know. She's changing gradually, which is what happened to me.
Do you think it was the physical things, or do you think it is the physical things that are hardest to cope with, or is it the psychological stress?
Without question, psychological. There's no doubt about it at all in my mind. Very similar to what Elaine was saying. Not being able to do the ordinary things we take for granted, not being able to socialize with other people, and of course, physical problems as well on me, because you're doing all these things, or trying to do your best, working, coping with the family. But you see, really, that's a psychological problem in itself, because, you see, because your mind's always occupied worrying about the things that you would normally have a partner to help you worry with about, small things, doing the shopping and washing the kitchen floor and taking the kids out for the day, or whatever it might be, 1,001 things. That means that a husband can't sit down and put his feet up and read a book, or relax, or go out for a walk, because you're constantly worrying about what's for lunch tomorrow, what about work tomorrow, worrying about the spouse indoors.
I just have to say that there'll be a lot of women at home saying, poor him. Get away
Well,
now. And look at me taking care of my husband. Do you think that women and men should be treated differently in that situation? Because a lot of women, it's expected of them.
No, I mean, I've had this reverse prejudice slung at me quite a few times. In fact, we're in the days of equality. It does make me cross, in fact, because there are 120,000 one-parent male families, I think, 120,000. There's no reason why a man shouldn't be able to cope with the family, given enough time. All that happens is conditioning and upbringing determines that men grow beards, screw the birds, and play rugby. And women don't do things like that because nurse girls don't do it. Do they?
They don't play rugby.
What's your phone number?
Leave the fourth amendment.
Okay. But the point I'm trying to make about that is that it's conditioning that makes us do these things. I wasn't very good when I first started, quite honestly, and I didn't do it all that well. I wasn't bad at it, but I had to just learn these things just by trial and error.
Okay.
And look, there she is, look.
I know.
It's part of my trial and error.
I know. You've got reason to be proud.
I have reason to be proud.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Susan, you left your husband eventually, despite your illness. Now, what do you think it is about illness that makes you look at your marriage very carefully and say, well, it's one or the other?
Well, I believe marriage should be a sharing, and partners should be supportive of each other. I was supportive of my husband. When I desperately needed him to be supportive of me, he wasn't there. He just didn't want to know, he didn't want to discuss it. And I felt that I couldn't live that way. I couldn't, it was affecting my relationships with the children. I was closing up on myself. I was withdrawing within myself because there was no communication between us. And I didn't want that to affect my children, no matter what happened to me. I didn't want them to be, to experience a family life that wasn't truly loving and sharing and supportive.
And Kim?
Yes.
What is the matter with you?
There's nothing actually at the matter with me now, but I was diagnosed with having cancer of the womb.
Right.
And I'd been quite ill for some time before the diagnosis. And my husband, I think we would be married to the same people, actually.
Well, there may be more out there than us.
That's right. He just didn't want to know. Illness didn't exist. He'd never had a day's illness in his life at all. and he wasn't prepared to put up with it. In actual fact, I had a major operation, and I was in some distress after the operation, and he'd heard me crying and shouting, and doctors and nurses were in attendance. And when they finally settled me down and he was allowed in, the first words he said to me is, "Don't you ever put me through that again." Not, "How are you? Are you better?" It's just incredible. You know, even now, thinking about it, there's just no thought of me at all.
Did this reaction of his to your marriage move it in any direction?
Yes, it moved it right out of the window. It had been shaky before, but then, in actual fact, I'd been out of hospital 8 days, and he had a brain hemorrhage himself. And I was absolutely dumbfounded. It was, why should this happen to me? But no, I had had enough then. I'd been very ill, and then now he was very ill, and I thought there was something against me. But I wanted to help him. I wanted to do everything I could. I felt so helpless. But there again, his attitude when he did recover was that it didn't happen to him, he's not being ill, because illness just doesn't exist in his eyes.
If you had stayed with your husband, do you think you could have been what you hoped your husband would be to you? Could you have been nice to him?
I could have been nice to him, but I think I only would have been there because it would have been expected of me.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have walked out the door, but I would have stayed. I would have nursed him if I had to. But I had some affection for him, but I would rather have not been there, I think.
Okay, thank you. And Pauline, your husband became very ill, didn't
Yes.
he? What was the matter with him?
He was diagnosed as having terminal cancer 2 weeks before our wedding day. He was then my husband-to-be. And in fact, they gave him 3 months they thought he would live, but he died 3 weeks to the day after we were married.
What happened to your relationship then?
His business life he could cope with because he could bear not to work again, but he couldn't bear the fact that we were not going to enjoy our marriage. And therefore he withdrew, not because he wished to, but because it was the only way he could face up to what was about to happen to him.
Well, what happened to you? How did you feel? Did you kind of feel left out on a limb?
Initially, I was a little surprised. Then I realized that this was the only way he felt he could cope with this very stressed situation. And I understood, and I knew that he wasn't deliberately doing this, that it was the only way he could handle it.
Thank you. Well, you've heard a lot and seen a lot, haven't you? Have you learned anything from being here?
We've learned there's a lot more people going through the same thing as we are, which is...
Does that help you?
Yeah.
How?
Well, you know, you're not alone. There is others out there that are, you know, slugging it out.
Struggling?
So, yeah. But
I think it has brought us closer together.
Well, that's great.
It has been times that we've been miles and miles apart.
Yes, but that's a very hopeful message for people who are watching out there. If you try, and if you try to understand, like Ashley has,
You've got to stick to it. I know it's a lot to go through, but if you've got enough courage and you help each other, you can pull through it.
Just.
Thank you. Well, there are two important points, it seems to me, that's come out of tonight's discussion. The first thing is that while ill people may have difficulty in coming to terms with their own illness, we must also remember that a partner's emotional needs can be very great too, and they need help just as much. The other thing is that illness can make us examine a marriage very closely in a way we don't usually do, and we can actually see it for what it is, a good one that can get better, or a bad one that might break up. Thank you. Good night.